For those of you who don't know, this is a Chemex. It's a piece of brewing equipment for brewing filter coffee. A filter would go in it like so, and then ground coffee would go in the filter, and then you'd pour water over the ground coffee. And then once you'd poured all your water and it had drained, you throw out the filter, and then you just have the coffee, and it also is used as a serving vessel. The classic Chemex comes with this wooden collar, and not pictured here because I already took it off, a rawhide band. The point of this video is for anyone that wants to clean their Chemex, untying and then retying that rawhide band is a pain in the butt, and I don't like it. So I took mine off and just replaced it with this strip of leather, which is similarly hard to get off and retie. So today I'm going to try and make a new band with an easier to remove strap, and I'm going to use these watch strap hardware pieces to accomplish that. The second issue is that the collar itself, it doesn't come with much of a finish. So over time, I don't know if you can see it from here, it's got a lot of like water stain, and it's like worn away, and it's rough looking. And some people like that. They call it patina. I don't like that. So I'm going to try and find a new way to finish it. I have sandpaper and I have beeswax, and so I think I'm just gonna wax this collar as a finish and try to like buff it out and see if that works. I'm gonna get all my tools and materials together, and those are gonna be in the description. So let's just go ahead and get started. There we go. I can't see myself. What do I look like? I have a pizza box. So I'm gonna use this to make the first pattern. I hate sanding. It takes forever. Okay, so put this in the fridge. I'm just gonna take a paper towel and get to work. It looks pretty good. I'll just rub that all in. All right, so I have this canvas square. You don't really need canvas specifically, like any old piece of cloth or a towel or a t-shirt or a washcloth, I don't care. You want to like press down on this hard to like really buff it out. So yeah. Hi routine. I'd say that looks pretty damn good. Okay, so I've shown you how to refinish the collar, but now I really need to show you how to make the band. And not just for this size Chemex, but for any size Chemex, for your size Chemex. So let's go ahead and do that now, because that's the whole point of this video anyway. Or ultimately, you could just buy it from an Etsy shop. I don't see why you couldn't do that. I already made it. I did the thing. I made a pattern for it too. But I want to break down this process.
Let's start with what you need for refinishing the collar. Paper towels, avocado or coconut oil, beeswax, a piece of canvas or any other old cloth or rag, 80, 120, and 220 grit sandpaper, and finally, essential oil. Although this isn't essential, it'll just make your collar smell really good. For the strap, you will need a 4x16, 2 to 3 ounce thick piece of vegetable tanned leather or any other piece of leather that fits the dimensions of the template, a box cutter, a pen, a rubber mallet, a long and a short metric ruler, preferably a machinist ruler with flat edges, waxed nylon or polyester thread, glue. In reality, most glues will work. It doesn't have to be leather glue. Alternatively, you could also use double-sided sticky tape or rubber cement. Pricking irons are forks. Mine are from Amazon and are 6 mil, which means a pretty wide distance between stitches. A number 1 size round drive hole punch. Office clips. And bonus points if you have a lighter, an awl, and a burnishing rod, but these items aren't completely necessary. A cutting mat. And if you don't have one, then a cheap plastic cutting board will do just fine. A thin cardboard box or piece of cardstock for making sample templates. Harness needles, preferably 000 in size, but if you only have regular leather stitching needles, then those work too. Do not use sewing needles or any other needle that is sharp. And bonus points if you have a little storage vessel for them. And finally, 22mm watch buckle hardware. The sizing refers to the inside dimensions. In the description is a link to a template I made on FIGMA that has all the dimensions listed for this project. Okay, first things first, we're going to make our template. The reason we're doing this is to isolate any mistakes we make to the template and not to the piece itself. And this also allows for repeatability. We can make this piece over and over again as we see fit from this template. First, we'll draw a line the length of the piece and mark dots at each end of that line. Using the corners of our ruler, we'll draw a right angle at both ends of the template. And then we can mark the width on each end and then draw the opposing side. We'll cut out our template, and then we'll measure for the slot that the tooth of the watch buckle will fit through. To do this, we'll measure 20 millimeters and 14 millimeters from the end of the template and mark lines on both sides. And then we'll draw lines between both of those marks, just like so. If they look straight, good, but if they don't, you can draw more lines to straighten them out. Where those lines intersect, we're going to use our drive punch to make holes. We'll use our box cutter to cut out the space between those holes, keeping the cuts the same diameter of the holes if we can, close to the edge. And now we have our slot. This is a simple and easy way to make slots in templates, so it helps to have drive punches of many different sizes. Now we'll make the tail end of our template. The measurements on the FIGMA are a little different. In this video, I marked lines 15 millimeters from the end, or 1.5 centimeters, and 4 millimeters from the sides. And then I cut out the points connecting those lines to get that taper. Now that our template is done, we can cut out on the leather. I like to tape longer templates down, and sometimes I'll even tape the leather down to the cutting surface just so everything stays flat. In this video, I used a regular ballpoint pen, but if you have a white pen or a leather pen, that's even better. I followed up with the point of my burnishing rod just to indent those lines into the leather. You may want to make several passes just so it shows up. And now it's time to cut. You want to lay down your ruler so that it's right on the edge of the line. To keep the correct width, you actually want to cut inside the lines that you traced. Focus on keeping even and solid pressure on the ruler and just trace your knife over the cuts with light, solid pressure. The cuts you want to make should be light passes because you really want to score the leather, and then that score will give your knife a guide to cut through. And now that our piece is cut out, we can move on to the slot. And just like in the template, I'm using my drive punch to punch out the ends of the slot, and then I'm cutting out the space between. To make more accurate punches, you can make a light mark with the drive punch first, just an indentation. And if that looks right, if that looks spot on, then you can punch it through. Now I'm using a very light amount of water to wet the edges of the piece, giving it a few passes with my burnishing rod just to smooth out any fibers that are sticking up, give it a nice finish. The leather that I'm using doesn't actually burnish that well. Otherwise, I'd spend a lot more time on this step. I cut my piece out a little thick, so I'm going back with a knife just to make it thinner to make room for the buckle. And now it's time to glue. I'm using some of my sandpaper to rough up the leather, get some of those fibers to stick up so that there's a better bond. Now I can dab some of my glue on. A little goes a long way here. I'll dab it around with my finger to get complete coverage. Be careful when you're sliding the buckle on so that glue doesn't get all over the place, especially on the top of the leather. We want to fold the end over in such a way that the slot has been folded in half evenly. Now we can use our office clips to keep the hold, and we'll set a timer for 30 minutes. Now that that's done, it's time to stitch. With the piece flipped over, I'll trace a line with a pen or an awl that's 4 millimeters away from the edge of the piece on that flap. This is the stitch line. I'll center my fork on that line, being careful that none of the tines come too close to the edges. We don't want the holes to be too close because there's a chance that they could collapse on that edge and ruin the piece. I like to make light presses to make sure the fork is in the right place. Once I know for sure, I'll press down on the fork with the hand I'm holding it with before giving it a solid hit. Now that one set of holes has been made, I can advance my fork with some overlap. So some of those tines are in the holes that have already been punched. And I'll use those holes as a guide for punching the next set of holes. And now that that's been done, it's time to stitch. I'm going to use a comfortable amount of thread here. Typically, you want to use 4 times the amount of thread as the distance you'll be stitching, but I'll use even more than that just to be safe. This part's a little bit tricky. This is how we're going to lock our thread onto our needle. After threading the needle, I'll pull out about 4 inches of thread through, and then I'll take the needle and pierce it halfway through that 4 inches. And then I'll push the needle through that thread, and then I'll pull the other end of the thread so the knot on the thread pulls down and locks onto the needle. And I'll do it again on the other side. As you can see, thread the needle, pierce the thread, push the needle through, and then pull from the other end to lock it on. And now you're ready to stitch. I messed this part up completely. Everything's out of frame. I'm using a basic saddle stitch here. I'll include a link in the description. Good video for how to do that. Everything is getting a double pass. Just means I'm stitching over it twice. And I'm looping the thread around the ends for a nice look, but you don't have to do that here. To finish my stitch, I'm going to push both of my needles through that flap underneath the buckle, and then I'll make a knot with both ends of the thread. Now I'm smoothing the stitch out with my burnishing rod, following up with a lighter to tighten up the stitch. You don't have to do this. If you do, don't get the lighter too close. Otherwise, the stitch can melt and it'll break. And if you really want to seal it, you can heat up a stitching awl and then press it onto the knot that you made. Again, be careful not to heat it too much or press too tightly because it could break the stitch. Now we're going to follow up with some of that wax that we made for the collar, just to get the leather nice and shiny. And we're done. That's it. We've made our strap.
Editing Steven here. First off, apologies for the horrible narration. I'm learning. So, the Chemex that I've been working on is an 8-cup Chemex. The classic series of Chemex comes in 4 sizes: 3, 6, 8, and 10. The last 3 sizes, they all share the same collar dimensions, meaning that this pattern will work for all 3. Now, the reason why I left the hole out on the pattern is because every piece of glass and every wooden collar has slight variations to it. So where you punch your hole is going to be different based on your Chemex. And so we're going to do that at the very end. So I want you to put your collars on, and I want you to put your band on and fasten it, and then I want you to have it facing away from you with your right hand pulling on the strap so that it's comfortably tight. Not too tight, just comfortably tight. And with one of your fingers on your left hand, I want you to push the tooth of that buckle into the leather until you're confident that it's going to leave a mark. Where you leave that mark is where you're gonna punch your hole. And once you've done that, well, then you've got yourself a finished band, and you could admire your handiwork. So thank you for that. Peace.